The gentle morning sunlight streamed peacefully into the small house in Tampa, Florida. Margaret Thompson woke up every morning at 6 o'clock. The regular living habits she had developed during her career as a nurse remained unchanged. "Good morning, George." Margaret smiled tenderly toward her husband's photograph placed on the living room mantelpiece. In the photo, framed in silver, George wore his characteristic friendly smile. Her husband, who had suddenly passed away from a heart attack 3 years ago, had always called Margaret Maggie. "Looks like it's going to be another beautiful day. The roses in the garden are blooming so nicely." For her, having grown accustomed to living alone, this conversation with her husband's photograph was a natural morning ritual. While brewing coffee in the kitchen, she gazed out at the small garden through the window. The well-maintained lawn and colorful flowers quietly welcomed her, the house's only resident. 3 years had passed since her retirement, but Margaret's life was far from monotonous. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she volunteered at the nearby St. Patrick's Church. Reading picture books to the Sunday school children was the most enjoyable time of her week. "Aunt Maggie, what story are we having today?" The children adored her and always gathered around with sparkling eyes. Every time Margaret saw their innocent smiles, she felt something warm stirring deep in her heart. The other women at church also called her Aunt Maggie affectionately, and she had become an indispensable part of this small community. In the afternoons, Margaret's routine was to sit in the living room armchair, knitting while watching daytime television programs. Occasionally, she would pause to look at the family photographs displayed on the wall. The wedding photo, a commemorative shot at their new home, and one taken at the hospital the day their son was born. However, among them was one photograph that was clearly from a different era than the others. A picture of a young man around 18 years old. Every time Margaret looked at that photograph, she wore a complex expression. When her church friends got excited talking about their grandchildren, she would always just smile vaguely. "How is your son doing?" she was sometimes asked. At such times, Margaret could only manage to say, "Yes, he seems to be doing well." In truth, she didn't know about her son's current situation. The last time she had seen him was many years ago. In the evenings, Margaret would prepare dinner for one. The refrigerator contained only the bare minimum of ingredients. The kitchen that had once prepared meals for a family of 4 was now enveloped in silence. After finishing her meal, she would wash the dishes while gazing out the window. Sometimes she could hear the laughter of families from the neighboring houses. At night, Margaret would speak to George's photograph once more before going to bed. "It was another peaceful day today. But sometimes, I find myself thinking about that boy." Her voice trembled slightly. Something sealed deep in her heart would rear its head in the quiet darkness of night. However, Margaret avoided thinking too deeply about it. Digging up past pain was unbearable for her. On Sunday morning, Margaret woke up earlier than usual. Today there was choir practice, and she needed to get ready in time for the 10 o'clock Mass. She took out a light purple blouse and navy skirt from the closet and groomed herself in front of the mirror. Her hair had a few white strands mixed in, but she still maintained a youthful appearance. "Please watch over me today as well." Margaret lightly pressed her hands together toward George's photograph and left the house. St. Patrick's Church was about a 15-minute walk away. Sunday mornings in Tampa were peaceful, and she could see families heading to church from the neighboring houses. The cheerful voices of children echoed through the residential area. When she arrived at the church, the choir members had already gathered. Most were women of Margaret's generation, and they all had the approachability of longtime friends. "Maggie, good morning." Dorothy Harris waved as she approached. At 70 years old, she was still energetic and always wore a bright smile. "Good morning, Dorothy. What a beautiful day." "Indeed it is. By the way, my granddaughter Katie came to visit yesterday. She's 8 now and has gotten so good at piano. I'll have her play for you sometime." The other women began talking about their grandchildren one after another. Elizabeth bragged about a picture her 5-year-old grandson had drawn in kindergarten, and Ruth happily shared how her 12-year-old grandson was excelling on his soccer team. "Maggie, how old is your grandson now?" At the sudden question, Margaret gripped the sheet music in her hands tightly. "Well, I don't have." Seeing her struggle for words, Dorothy smiled gently. "Oh, that's right, Maggie doesn't have any grandchildren yet. But I'm sure you'll have wonderful grandchildren someday." Margaret could only smile vaguely in return. When practice began, she sang beautiful alto harmonies, but somewhere in her heart, a small thorn seemed to remain lodged. After Mass ended, Margaret headed to the supermarket for shopping as usual. She parked her car in the parking lot and walked through the store pushing a small cart. She selected broccoli and carrots in the produce section, and at the meat counter purchased chicken breast for one person. As she was about to pass through the frozen food section, her feet suddenly stopped. Margaret stood transfixed in front of shelves lined with children's snacks and ice cream. Colorful packaged popsicles and animal-shaped cookies caught her eye. "I used to buy these so often." Her quietly murmured words went unheard by other shoppers passing by. Margaret sighed deeply and hurried away from the spot. While paying at the checkout, she overheard a conversation between a young mother and child shopping in the next lane. "Mommy, can I take this when we visit Grandma's house next time?" "Of course, dear. Grandma will be so happy." An inexplicable loneliness spread through Margaret's chest. When she returned home, Margaret placed the shopping bags in the kitchen and spent her usual afternoon tea time. But today she felt somehow restless. As she walked around the house, her eyes fell upon the entrance to the attic in the hallway ceiling. "Come to think of it, I haven't organized up there recently." She brought a stepladder and climbed into the attic for the first time in a long while. In the dusty space, unused furniture and boxes were stacked up. Old Christmas decorations, George's college textbooks, and in a corner, a small wooden box. Margaret approached the box. Its surface had fine scratches and had clearly not been used for a long time. When she picked it up, she heard a small sound from inside. It sounded like toys were inside. She placed her hand on the box's lid, but Margaret suddenly pulled her hand back. Her heart was beating rapidly. She knew something important was inside, but she didn't have the courage to look. "It's not time yet." Muttering as if convincing herself, Margaret returned the box to its original place. When she came down from the attic, the day was still bright, but she somehow felt tired. She began preparing dinner, but it didn't proceed with her usual efficiency. While cutting onions, her hands suddenly stopped. Looking out the window, she saw a small boy practicing bicycle riding in the yard across the street. A man who appeared to be his father was supporting him from behind while calling out encouragement. "Keep trying, Ben. You're almost there." "Daddy, I'm scared." "It's okay, Daddy's right here with you." Margaret put down her knife and watched the scene intently. When the boy succeeded in pedaling by himself for the first time, his father clapped loudly with joy. "You did it. You're amazing." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. Long ago, she had experienced a similar scene herself. She vividly remembered the day she taught her young son how to ride a bicycle. After finishing dinner, Margaret was knitting in the living room but couldn't concentrate. She made mistakes repeatedly and finally placed the yarn on her lap. Standing up, she went to the bookshelf and took out an old album from the bottom shelf. As she turned the pages of the album, photos of the happy family of 3 appeared one after another. Beach vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Then her hands stopped at one photograph. It was a picture of a boy about 7 years old swinging a baseball bat in the yard. George was acting as pitcher, and Margaret was the catcher in this heartwarming family scene. The boy's face was innocent, filled with hope for the future. Michael. Her son's name escaped in a hoarse voice. Margaret quickly closed the album and returned it to the bookshelf. That night, Margaret had fallen into an unusually deep sleep. Perhaps because her heart was tired from the day's events, she didn't wake up in the middle of the night as usual and was in a peaceful dream. In the dream, she had become her younger self, playing in a park with a small child. The child's face wasn't clearly visible, but only that laughter could be heard distinctly. A little after 2 in the morning, the peace was suddenly shattered by a violent sound. The sound of someone pounding on the front door echoed through the house wrapped in silence. Margaret bolted upright. Her heart was beating violently, and sweat was seeping under her nightgown. The clock showed 2:15 a.m. The violent knocking sounded again. This time it seemed more desperate. Margaret turned on the bedside lamp with trembling hands and put on her slippers. For a woman living alone, nothing was more frightening than a visitor in the middle of the night. Who could it be, at this hour? As she moved from the bedroom to the hallway, the knocking became even more violent. But this time something was different. It wasn't the sound of an adult's fist knocking, but something smaller, more fragile. Help, someone, help. At the faint voice she heard, Margaret listened carefully. It was clearly a child's voice. Moreover, it sounded like crying, trembling. A child? At this hour? Margaret cautiously approached the front door. Looking through the peephole, she could see a small figure. In the dim light of the street lamp, it definitely looked like a child. A boy about 6 or 7 years old was standing in front of the door, trembling. "Grandma, help me. Grandma." The moment she heard that voice, something changed within Margaret. Rather than fear, the desire to help this small being won out. However, she mustn't forget to be cautious. Little boy, what's wrong? Where are your mother and father?" She called out through the door. The boy turned around and faced the door with his tear-stained face. His clothes were dirty and his hair was disheveled. It looked as if he had been outside for a long time. "Grandma, it's me, Ethan, don't you remember?" At those words, Margaret was confused. She didn't recall the name Ethan. "Ethan? I'm sorry, little boy. But Grandma, who's Grandma?" "Your Grandma Maggie, right? Daddy showed me your picture. He said you were a very kind person." Margaret's hands trembled. Only her husband George and very close friends called her Maggie. But who on earth was this child? "Little boy, what's your father's name?" With the door chain still on, she opened the door slightly. The boy's face became more clearly visible. His large brown eyes were moist with tears, and the tip of his nose was red. He wore a dirty blue t-shirt and jeans, with old sneakers that didn't fit properly on his feet. "Daddy's name is Michael Thompson." At that moment, Margaret's world stopped. The blood drained from her face, and her knees began to shake. Michael Thompson. The name of the son who had left home 30 years ago. That can't be, impossible. Daddy told me. When you're in trouble, go to this address in Tampa. That's where Grandma Maggie lives. The boy took out a wrinkled piece of paper with his small hand. Written on it was definitely Margaret's address. She recognized the handwriting. It was her son's. "I've been walking for 3 days now. I didn't want to stay with Mommy anymore." Margaret's knees shook completely. She had to lean against the door to remain standing. 3 days. Where on earth from? What about your mother? "I came from Jacksonville." Mommy. Mommy hits me. Ever since Daddy went away, she's angry every day. The boy's voice became even smaller. And with the next words, Margaret was forced to accept reality completely. Daddy went to heaven 2 weeks ago, in a car accident. Michael died. Margaret's voice trembled, and tears streamed down her cheeks. The reality that the son she hadn't seen for 30 years was no longer in this world. And that son's child was now in front of her, asking for help. Grandma, do you believe me? Daddy used to say that Grandma Maggie was the kindest person in the world. He said you even had pictures of me when I was little. The boy took out a bent photograph from his small backpack. It was definitely a photo of Margaret from her younger days. She was holding a baby in the picture. That baby was Michael. This photograph, where did you? It was in Daddy's special box. There were lots of pictures of you, Grandma. Daddy would sometimes look at them and cry. Margaret's heart felt like it would burst. Her son hadn't forgotten his mother. On the contrary, he had carefully preserved the photographs and even talked about her to his son. Little boy. Ethan. The moment she called his name, Margaret removed the door chain and opened the door wide. The boy was exhausted and looked like he might collapse at any moment. Grandma, are you really Grandma Maggie? Yes, little boy. I'm your grandmother. The moment she said those words, Margaret collapsed to her knees. 30 years of suppressed emotions poured out all at once. The reality of having a grandson, the fact of her son's death, and the miracle that this small life had come all this way to depend on her. Grandma, are you okay? Ethan touched Margaret's shoulder with his small hand. At that tenderness, Margaret's tears flowed even more. I'm fine, Ethan. Grandma is fine. Now, let's go inside. You must be cold. Margaret stood up and took Ethan's small hand. That hand was cold and trembling. She led him to the living room and had him sit on the sofa. Wait here. I'll make something warm for you. As she headed to the kitchen, Margaret realized that her life had completely changed. The son she had lost 30 years ago would never return. But the most precious gift that son had left was now in her house. While warming cocoa, Margaret wiped away her tears. She didn't know what would happen next. The child's mother, legal issues, and above all, how to protect this child. But one thing was certain. I'm not alone anymore. The quietly murmured words echoed in the kitchen's silence. As Margaret poured the warm cocoa into a cup, her hands trembled slightly. From the kitchen, she could see into the living room where Ethan sat curled up small on the large sofa. Seeing his exhausted state, Margaret's chest tightened. Here, drink this. It will warm you up. Margaret offered the cocoa and sat next to Ethan. The boy held the cup with both hands and slowly brought it to his lips. At that moment, a small expression of relief appeared on his face. Thank you, Grandma. Ethan, did you really walk all the way here for 3 days? Margaret asked gently. From Jacksonville to Tampa was about 300 kilometers. The thought of a 6-year-old child traveling such a distance alone was terrifying. At first I took a bus. But I didn't have enough money, so they made me get off partway. After that I just walked. Sometimes people gave me rides in their cars. Ethan's voice was small and sometimes trembling. Margaret looked at his dirty clothes and scratched up hands, imagining how much this small child had suffered. Can you tell me a little more about your father? Ethan looked up at Margaret with his large eyes. Those eyes held deep sadness. Daddy worked at construction sites. He left early every morning and came home late at night. But he was kind to me. We played baseball together, and he read books to me. Margaret tried to imagine what her son looked like as an adult. That young man who had left home at 18 had become a father, working desperately to support his family. About the accident, do you remember? Yes. That day, Daddy left like normal. But when night came and he didn't come home, Mommy was really worried. Then the police came. Ethan's voice caught. Margaret gently embraced his small shoulders. A big truck hit Daddy's car. Daddy was taken to the hospital right away, but tears streamed down Ethan's cheeks. Margaret's eyes also grew hot. Regret washed over her for not being able to be at her son's bedside. Daddy was worried about me until the very end. Before he lost consciousness at the hospital, he told Mommy, "If anything happens to me, take Ethan to Maggie's place in Tampa." Margaret's chest felt like it would burst. Her son had remembered his mother until his final moment. "Where is your mother now?" Ethan's expression suddenly darkened. His small body shrank even more. "Mommy changed after Daddy went away. She used to take medicine sometimes before, but she started taking much more." A bad feeling spread through Margaret's chest. "What kind of medicine?" "White powder stuff. When she takes it, Mommy becomes different. She gets angry and hits me, or says bad words." Drugs. From her experience as a nurse, Margaret immediately understood the situation. Her son's wife was addicted to drugs. When Daddy was alive, Mommy didn't take it so much. But after Daddy went away, she takes it every day. When I try to talk to her, she doesn't answer, and she doesn't cook for me. Ethan rolled up the sleeve of his t-shirt. Margaret gasped. His small arm had several blue bruises. They were clearly marks from being hit by an adult. "This is. Mommy does this when she gets angry. She says, 'I wish I'd never had you,' while." Something exploded inside Margaret. That this small, innocent child had been treated this way. "It's going to be okay now, Ethan. I won't let you suffer like that anymore." Margaret held him tightly. For the first time, Ethan relaxed and buried his face in his grandmother's chest. "Do you have other pictures of Daddy?" Ethan took out a wrinkled envelope from his small backpack. Inside were several photographs and a letter. The first photograph showed young Michael and Margaret making cookies together in the kitchen. The next photo was of the family of 3 on Christmas morning. And the last one was from Michael's high school graduation. "Daddy always looked at these pictures. And he told me, 'You have a wonderful grandmother.'" Margaret's tears wouldn't stop. When she opened the letter, she saw her son's familiar handwriting. "To my beloved Ethan. If anything happens to me, go to this address. Your grandmother lives there. When I was about your age, Grandma was the kindest person in the world. I'm sure she will love you too. Tell Grandma that Daddy loved her until the very end. With love, Daddy." Margaret wept aloud. 30 years of misunderstanding, lost time, and her son's deep love. Everything came rushing at her at once. "Grandma, why are you crying?" "These are tears of joy, Ethan. I'm so happy to meet you." At that moment, the front door was pounded violently. Margaret and Ethan looked at each other in surprise. "Open up. I know Ethan is in there." A woman's shrill voice could be heard. It was clearly not a normal state, a rough, wild voice. "Mommy." Ethan's face went pale with fear. His body began to tremble. "How did she know where I was?" "Someone must have told her." "But it's okay, I won't let you go anymore." Margaret hid Ethan behind the sofa and carefully looked outside through the peephole. A woman was standing there. Her hair was disheveled and her clothing was in disarray. Her eyes were bloodshot, and it was clear she was under the influence of drugs. "Ethan! Come out!" You're my son. The sound of kicking the door echoed. Margaret quickly called the police. After ending the call, Margaret returned to Ethan. The boy was trembling under a blanket. It's okay, Ethan. The police are coming. I won't let Mommy take you anymore. But I'm Mommy's child, aren't I? Blood relation alone doesn't make a family. The people who truly love you are your family. Outside, the woman's screaming continued, but soon the sound of sirens could be heard. Margaret confirmed from the window that police vehicles had arrived. There, it's all over. From now on, I'll protect you. Ethan nodded slightly and squeezed Margaret's hand. That hand was no longer trembling. When the police arrived, the situation began moving rapidly. Jessica resisted in a state of delirium but was ultimately arrested for drug possession. Blood tests revealed multiple illegal substances in her system, and evidence of child abuse was also confirmed. The bruises and scars on Ethan's body told the story of her actions. Ma'am, is this child definitely your grandson? To the police officer's question, Margaret answered without hesitation. Yes, without a doubt. He's my son Michael Thompson's child. The next day, a social worker from Child Protective Services visited. DNA test results confirmed that Ethan was definitely Margaret's grandson. Jessica was ordered to enter a drug addiction treatment facility and would need at least a year of treatment. Mrs. Thompson, let's discuss custody of your grandson. Margaret signed the application documents without hesitation. The legal procedures took time, but 3 months later, she officially gained custody of Ethan. During that time, Margaret's life changed completely. She converted the small upstairs room into Ethan's room and brought down children's furniture that Michael had once used from the attic. The wooden box she hadn't been able to open contained Michael's childhood toys, carefully preserved. Were these Daddy's toys? Ethan's eyes sparkled as he picked up an old wooden train. Yes. I gave it to your father for his 7th birthday. Margaret smiled gently. The pain of the past had now transformed into warm memories. On Sunday morning, Margaret participated in the church choir for the first time in a while. Ethan sat well-behaved beside her. Maggie, what a lovely grandson. Dorothy called out happily. The other women also welcomed Ethan warmly. Everyone, this is my grandson Ethan. Margaret introduced him proudly. Her feelings at that moment were filled with happiness she couldn't have imagined 3 months ago. After practice, Margaret and Ethan visited St. Mary Cemetery in Tampa. On the newly erected headstone was carved, Michael Thompson, beloved son and father. Daddy, I'm living with Grandma now. Grandma is really kind. Just like you said she was. Ethan touched the headstone with his small hand as he spoke. Margaret knelt before her son's grave and spoke in her heart. Michael, I will responsibly raise the precious treasure you left behind. For 30 years we misunderstood each other, but your love has been properly passed on to Ethan. On the way home from the cemetery, Ethan held Margaret's hand with his small one. Grandma, I'm really happy. I'm not scared anymore. So am I, Ethan. I'm very happy too. Margaret answered from her heart. She was beginning a new life. The lost 30 years wouldn't come back, but the time ahead was full of infinite possibilities. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Margaret spoke to George's photograph in the living room. George, we have a grandson. You must be rejoicing in heaven too. Family isn't just about blood relations. But even if you're related by blood, without love, you're not family. It took 30 years, but I've learned the true meaning of family. The next morning, Margaret woke to Ethan's bright laughter. From the kitchen came the sound of him humming while helping with breakfast. She was no longer alone. Love and laughter had returned to this small house. Margaret Thompson's new life was quietly beginning.